Hi, everyone, for part 2 of my interview with Jack Roth, author of Killing Kennedy. I got it right here, exploring the plot, the cover-up, and the consequences. If you didn't check out part 1, that's freely available on my YouTube channel. Do check it out. It was a great conversation, and we're just continuing onward. I loved where we just were kind of wrapping this up. By the way, you were very nice. You kind of let me go on a little bit of a rant there, and I was supposed to be interviewing you, but thank you. I think this idea of the Kennedy assassination as this horrible psychological trauma visited upon the nation, that's something that you really did explore a lot. And I wonder if we can go back a little bit to that and just revisit, some of the damage that you think it did to us, and any other direction you want to go. If we want to talk about UFOs, I'm game with that as well. And I think you mentioned some notes beforehand. If we want to talk about JFK and Eisenhower and UFOs, I'm totally on board with that. I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm open to all of it. I love it. I love it. And I was hoping that you would go on a little bit of a rant because, I think you're perfectly positioned, being who you are, to talk about this. I mean, you're first and foremost, I always thought of you as a historian, as a well-learned historian who understands history. I mean, I feel like your whole approach to UFOs, I mean, again, you're the two volumes that you wrote about the UFOs and the national security state. I recommend those two books to anyone who read those two books first.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
To get a better understanding of the history of this. And then you'll really understand it. Then you can go from there. Read John Mack, read Bud Hopkins, read the good ones, but start with this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's why we always have you in our documentaries. I mean, but and again, I'm saying this sincerely, Richard. I mean, that's why I was really excited to talk to you about this, because I know you have a lot of really good takes on this, because we're talking about American history. We're talking about, and there are a lot of similarities between what was going on with Kennedy during the Cold War and what was going on with UFOs in the Cold War. That whole idea of cover up, and only certain people can know about certain things, and they were all dealing with it. Eisenhower dealt with it, and I think he talked to Kennedy about it. And you probably know more about that, and I didn't get into too much of that in the book, but.
Well, I wonder, because what you talk about a Kennedy-Eisenhower UFO connection, now there are some interesting places to work off of, but they're all disputed. Like, you've got the infamous but very interesting Majestic documents, and I'm not sure if you've really explored those at all. But when you print them off, in fact, I have the print off of them right here. Let me show you. I keep these with me. So these were off the website of Ryan and Bob Wood, and there's a lot of Kennedy and Eisenhower stuff in here, and there's a tremendous amount of debate over whether they're authentic or not. But you can see, like, I can say this here, it's a shitload of number of documents that are, many of them are original, some are retypes. It's fascinating. And so within that, there's definite Eisenhower and Kennedy era UFO documents that are quite disputed, but I personally think that some of them are legit. In the first part of our talk, I referenced a November 11th document signed by Kennedy. That's part of the Majestic documents, and a number of years later, a researcher got them out of an archive. So I think that's a legitimate document where Kennedy's talking about, he's instructing the CIA to cooperate with the Soviets on identifying UFOs.
Which he would have if you follow everything else that Kennedy was doing in his presidency. That made sense. He wanted a joint space program, so it was like, let's work together.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got the Marilyn Monroe document, which we didn't really get to talk about in part 1. It's the one day before she dies. It's dated August 4th, 1962. And I actually don't know if that's a Majestic document, but that's been out. I think it is. And yes, that is. Are you familiar with this at all? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so it's a disputed document, and it's a CIA document, or an alleged CIA document, in which they're talking about Marilyn's unhappiness with the Kennedy brothers, because what did happen historically is that, you know, she had obviously had a famous affair with John F. Kennedy, which had gone back into the 1950s. I mean, they knew each other for many, many years, and then Kennedy was basically forced in the spring of 62 to break it off with her, because his advisors are like, look, there's a sex scandal that just took down the prime minister of the UK. It was called the Profumo scandal. And it's like, this is going to happen to you because you're having sex with the most famous woman in the world, dude. She's sneaking into the White House. Like, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And apparently he's like, yeah, I got to stop that. So he tells Bobby to break the news to her. And then Bobby, a married man, father of 8, he starts up with her, because it's like, it's Marilyn Monroe. I mean, okay, we get it. But like, they go torrid for a few months, and then apparently he breaks it off. And so by the summer of 62, she's kind of ticked off at them. And she's like, you know, who the hell do they think I am? I'm Marilyn Monroe. They can't just cut me out. So she was angry. And this memo, I'm going to find it, but I think it's a real memo. I think it's legit. And she's talking about discussing her pillow talk with the president. And because she clearly had secrets, and she kept a diary that's never been found, you know, all of this never been found. So in the memo, it said that she was talking about the fact that the president had seen alien beings in Nevada, alien bodies from outer space. Was how the document said it. And that she was friends with Dorothy Kilgallen, the journalist, and talking with her, which I think that was true, that she knew her. Mm-hmm. So this was a document saying this woman's becoming a real problem. And then that night, she was killed.
Yeah,
I think she was murdered. I don't think she committed suicide at all.
No, there's a lot to that. That's such a sad thing. And that's what happens when, you know, you mentioned, okay, so Marilyn Monroe, they never found her diary.
That's right.
Mary Pinchot Meyer never found her diary. Ben Bradley said, oh, this is the diary. That was her artist sketchbook. It was not her diary. Her real diary, James Angleton broke into her house right after she was murdered and got the diary.
And she was really smart. Apparently she was just
Vassar. I mean, she herself was an elitist. I mean, she was her family. I mean, she was, you know, the Pinchots were, but she was a special woman. And again, this is getting into Peter Janney's book. And it was, I can't tell you how emotional it was just being in Georgetown and walking from her house to Ben Bradley's house, and her artist studio was behind it. And then just doing her walk from that day where she would come out of doing her artist studio, walk down the towpath, and then was murdered in cold blood.
Like a year after he was killed.
A year. And the Warren report came out. She said, literally, no, it's bull. You know what?
Yeah, right.
And she told a lot of people that, and a lot of the other wives of the CIA guys. And they're like, you know, Mary, you got to chill. Now, she was already divorced from Cord, so he hated her to begin with. Like, he was not happy with her to begin with. So this is, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but you talk about that. But also with Dorothy Kilgallen, they never found her work. They never found all of her documentation and the interviews and all the things that she was going to blow the case wide open.
Didn't a friend of hers also die mysteriously, or am I getting my people mixed up? I'm not really sure.
So you had Dorothy, you had Mary Pinchot Meyer, you had, I'm not sure, was there someone else other than?
I can't remember, and I could be wrong. I thought Dorothy Kilgallen may have had a female friend who knew a lot of these secrets and who also may have died. I can't remember that. It's possible. But yeah, Dorothy Kilgallen also, her main documents were apparently never found. Yeah, I mean, come on. This is obviously a major cleanup operation that's happening. And then you have, who's the guy that Joe Pesci played in the JFK movie?
David Ferry.
Ferry.
They killed him. I mean, they did. Well, listen, you know, and killing anyone is never a good thing. But
I've understood that killing is wrong. That's considered wrong now with the new morality.
listen.
Messing around. Yes,
No,
killing
but,
is wrong.
Killing is wrong. I
people.
mean, well, you say you execute murderers and mass. There are people
Right.
maybe who deserve to die, but
Right.
you have someone like David Ferry, who was also an operative, an asset of the intelligence agencies. He was a
Big time.
soldier. He lived that life. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. But when you start killing innocent women, civilian women,
Absolutely.
mothers, Mary Pinchot Meyer was a mother or two,
Yeah.
in their prime, and it becomes, there's a sadness to this that I think sometimes people overlook because you get so caught up in the facts and the minutia, like all this other stuff of, you're angry. And then you think to yourself, that's what happened to me in Georgetown. I was there and it hit me.
Yeah.
And Peter's like, like Peter, like, yeah, you're there. You get it.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is sad, Peter. And I'm like, yeah, he's like, no shit. Like, it's
I mean, Marilyn Monroe, like someone killed Marilyn Monroe. In fact, let me ask you, one of the worst things that I ever read, it was a good thing, but I hated reading it, was a study that really implicated the Kennedys themselves in the killing of Marilyn Monroe. And it's not a bad argument. Like, it's actually a pretty compelling argument in a lot of ways, because, Bobby Kennedy famously was seen going to her home, apparently the night before she was killed, or the night that she was killed, with two big bodyguard looking guys. Are you into any of this stuff? Have you been?
Yeah, I was.
What do you think about that?
I
don't want to put you on the spot if you haven't
No,
really gone into it.
I was very interested in I've read books about Marilyn Monroe when I was much younger. I was like, when I was growing up, she was the goddess of all goddesses. She was absolutely amazing. And of course, flawed. We're amazing, but flawed, right? So were the Kennedys, very flawed.
She's highly intelligent. Like, people forget like how smart she was. She'd been married to Arthur Miller, the great playwright, a few years before that. And, she's famous. She knew all the hot shots in the world. I mean, she was very sophisticated intellectually, as well as being this, beautiful starlet. But yeah, go on.
She was much more than what she let on.
Yeah.
And I think that started to bother her later in life, and especially the movies she was doing, because she wanted to be an actress. She didn't want to just be the most beautiful woman in the world, with an incredible body.
I will say she was genius level practically in Some Like It Hot with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon.
Oh,
one of the greatest comedies ever. I mean, really. And she was an integral part of that. She was really good in it.
And Jack Lemmon, who was in JFK, by the way. So Jack Lemmon's,
right?
Yeah, he had all that. Yeah, you make that connection. No, but I think that with Marilyn Monroe, I have heard that, and I like, listen, this book does not prop up the Kennedys as some kind of living gods. I mean, by any means. I mean, they played with fire. They were playing in the same ball field as the rest of these people.
Yeah.
And there was talk about being a megalomaniac, having this huge egos and thinking that they had a bit of that. They thought they could do whatever they wanted to do. And I'm sure, I don't know if they had something to do with killing Marilyn Monroe. And I've never been able to really get a handle on what happened there. There was a new documentary that came out recently about some of her not diary, but like, they talked about like her maid, or the housekeeper, or someone who was really, and they talked about that whole thing. But I felt it was one of those documentaries that didn't add anything to the mystery. It didn't answer any questions at all.
What I was led to understand that happened is that Bobby and two big guys visit her the evening, I guess the evening of August 4th. And I think they probably left with her diary, because her diary was very explosive and dangerous. So that's one thing. Because the idea was that she was going to have some kind of tell-all press conference where she was just going to, who knows what she was planning to say. She was deeply pissed at the Kennedys, and so she was going to do this press conference apparently. So Bobby goes in, they take that, and the next thing you know, she's dead. Now, in the book Double Cross by Chucky Giancana and some other author, they're talking about that, and they pinned her death on on Sam Giancana, on the Chicago mob, as a way of getting back at the Kennedy brothers over double crossing them. But I don't know. Like, I think Bobby Kennedy, I don't want to believe it. I want to root for the Kennedys on this, but you do not kill Marilyn Monroe. Come on. You don't do that. But it's possible. No. In the autopsy, I think misrepresented her time of death, if I'm not mistaken. And
right, and it was when they called it in as opposed to when she actually died, and
died much sooner.
Who saw the body first? Right,
I think it was her housekeeper.
Right, and what was happening the night before? Like you said, well, who were these guys going?
And
into the back
she was on the phone with some friend of hers, and I think Brazilian. I can't remember. She was on the phone. She was talking for a long time that night about how angry she was. So she wasn't like suicidal. There's no way. She was not suicidal. They suicided her. I don't think
she was either.
Yeah.
But it was easy to do that with her because she'd had some issues. So it was like the easiest thing in the world to set up. Oh yeah, she finally took too many pills. That's as easy as it gets.
Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know what I think about it, because I want to find myself rooting for the Kennedy brothers in this titanic struggle. The fact is, they were involved in a major struggle with the national security apparatus. There's no question about that.
And again, you're right. I mean, and I don't think that you want to be able to, and that's the thing with the book. You read the book and it's like, it's hard for it not to come across as, well, Kennedy was the good guy and these other guys were the bad guys. And in this case, that's true. I do believe certainly he didn't deserve to get his head blown off. So and Bobby, same thing. So, but is anyone, totally innocent of everything? Like, again, the Kennedys had their flaws, and you're right. I think I've probably done the same thing, because I don't want to think that the Kennedys killed Marilyn Monroe. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if John Kennedy could have pulled the trigger on something like that. I don't mean literally pull the trigger, but be like, oh yeah, we got to kill her. I don't know. I just don't know if he would have been capable of that.
I mean, there may be factors here that we'll never be aware of. I mean, the reason Bobby Kennedy gets discussed in this is because I think her neighbor saw him going in with two guys. But it's possible. What if the Kennedy left and then another team came in right after that and took her out? That might have been some other kind of deep state national security state operation that the Kennedys did not authorize. I don't really know.
Well, it could, and you're right, because it could have been something where they were all on the same page, where the CIA was like, well, of course we hate the Kennedys, but look, we got to clean up their mess. Right. Yeah. She's a threat, and she's talking about UFOs and other stuff. She needs to be taken out.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Jim Angleton, go to Brentwood and fly to Brentwood and pick a lock and get in and get her diary real quick. He was really good at that. He was like known as the locksmith. Like, he would go and pick locks and get people's stuff, which he did with Mary Pinchot Meyer. I mean, Ben Bradley caught him doing that.
Angleton actually was the guy who literally went in. He did this himself.
That high level.
He was in charge of all counterintelligence for the CIA.
Correct.
For years and years and years and years.
Correct. And when Mary Pinchot Meyer died, not only did he first breaks into her house. And Ben and Tony, Mary's sister, because Ben was married to her sister, and they're told about the murder. They go to her house, and who's in the living room? James Angleton. He broke in. So what are you doing here? And he's like, oh no, I was just, blah, blah, blah. So then they leave there. I don't know what they do. And later on they go back to their house, and there's Angleton again breaking into Mary's art studio, because her art studio was behind Ben Bradley's house. So he literally broke into two different places to find the diary, or what, at least the diary. And I said, Peter, am I right in thinking that? Is that what I'm gathering from this? He's like, oh yeah. So you're having the guy himself. How important must that diary have been?
That's probably the best question to ask about this whole affair, because you'd think Angleton was running all these ops
Yeah.
And yet this one was so important that he could not trust it to anyone.
Anyone.
He had to be the guy to do it. Because you have to assume CIA had other guys just as good.
Oh,
But
yeah.
this is so that would mean this is just whatever she had was way too sensitive. Well, you imagine what could have been. I feel bad because this is Peter's turf really more than anything else. But you just got to wonder what conversations JFK would have had with Mary Meyer while they were tripping out on acid in 1963, which she probably wrote about.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure she
Right?
did. I mean, she was Timothy Leary and her were good friends. You know, based on Peter's book and Peter's research. I mean, yeah, she was a woman. She was a Renaissance woman, and she was not your typical CIA wife of the 1960s. So, and she wanted a better life for herself and her children, not better financially because she had that, but I think more substance. And she was an artist. I mean, she was for peace. She was fairly liberal in her thinking. And when you talked about Kennedy changing, even through the course of his presidency, we can't count out the effect that Mary Pinchot Meyer had on him in that last year of his life.
Yeah.
Because if she could have really have influenced him even more to be like, you know, Jack, you think about what's going on here. I mean, this nuclear war and blah, blah, blah. So according to Peter, she was a really positive influence on him.
Yeah. Well, he attributed Kennedy's famous speech in, I think it was in June of 63. He's like, we all breathe the same air. We all want basically peace. And I think he believes that was actually an influence from his sessions with Mary that kind of opened him up, as it were, to a broader philosophy and consciousness, perhaps. So I mean, that makes sense to me, actually. But he's what a complex, fascinating story. And then there's, I mean, even Kennedy, you could just say in the 1940s and 50s when he was a young guy, he knew Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, who was certainly murdered, thrown out of the 16th floor of the Bethesda Naval Hospital back in 1949. That's something I looked at a lot. And apparently Kennedy was one of the visitors to Forrestal while he was hospitalized on at least one occasion. I mean, Kennedy was very young, but he had been a Navy man, and Forrestal was Secretary of the Navy. So, and of course, Kennedy was just super well connected. So why not? But, and I think there's the UFO connection with Kennedy as well. We didn't really talk a lot about what you think about Kennedy with UFOs, but I'd be curious what you think. Like, how much do you think he knew? Do you think there was some problems he had in getting access to information? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's all part of the same Cold War story. I think, you talk about when you talk about the UFOs and the modern era of UFOs pretty much started right after World War II. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we dropped the bomb, right? And then boom, we got their attention. Maybe that's what happened. And then you have 1947 Roswell. So then you have Truman, Eisenhower, and the Cold War starts. So the Cold War starts at the same time as the modern era of UFOs.
Exactly.
And so now you have, and this is where it gets tricky when you talk to people who were these military guys who were radar operators or were working at nuclear missile bases during the Cold War, and UFOs would fly over and cause havoc with the missiles or shut the base down. But it was always the first thing was, well, we need to go to DEFCON 1 because it's the Soviets. The first thing was making sure it wasn't the Soviets because it was the Cold War. So it was like, but then you realize there's no way the Soviets have technology that's that far advanced. There's no way. And they might have even fought, how they fought over the German scientists?
Yes, exactly.
The Nazi scientists. They were fighting over, I think, reverse engineering crash craft. So think about that. Like they have their crash. Do you hear about those crashes in UFOs in Russia? We have ours here. And then we talk about reverse engineering that technology. So I don't know how in their minds they were able to kind of be like, well, okay, so national security, we have the communists to deal with, but then we also have this pretty big uh, issue that is affecting technology, and that would be the UFOs. So it's not only just UFOs and their possible threat to humanity, but if one crashes, are the Soviets going to get the technology and we're not going to get it, and then they're just going to take us over? So you have all this weird dynamic, I'm thinking, that was going on. So then you have Eisenhower, and
That's
you know
a
how
great point, and it's one that
yeah,
I haven't really focused on that nearly as much as I probably should, because I think you're
it's
exactly right there.
it's
The
very
competition over
interesting, you
crash
know.
retrievals.
So, but here's Kennedy. Here comes Kennedy.
Yeah.
So you have Eisenhower, and then the only thing I knew was that they did obviously spoke, you know, more than once,
Mhm.
and there was probably that transitional thing that we were talking about earlier of, you know, having meetings, of transition meetings, and I'm sure Kennedy was like, well, what's going on with the UFO thing? And Eisenhower may have known a lot more about it, depending on what you believe happened with Eisenhower. I mean, you know,
I
did he
think they
meet
had
with?
a pretty good relationship.
Yeah,
I remember listening to a conversation, I think it was around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy did have conversations with Eisenhower and did seek his input and his advice on matters. But I think they both respected each other.
they did, and I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of relationship they had. But then you have,
Mhm.
so now you have Kennedy, and remember, so 1960, 61, so 61, 62, 63,
Yeah.
with all these major events happening with Cuba and everything else, you're still having the someone in the intelligence community is dealing with UFOs, whether it's naval intelligence, whoever it was back
Mhm.
then. If it went deeper, whoever
Right.
it might have been. So they're still having to deal with this UFO issue. And well, what's this threat? So it's almost like
Right.
this dual threat going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So you can imagine why they were like national security insane. Like, you know, wait, listen, we need to protect at all costs. Oh, we need to kill Mary Pinchot Meyer. Yeah, just take her out.
Mhm.
I mean, I hate to say it like that, but if you think about it, if that Cold Warrior mentality during that time of being like, oh, it must have been
Yeah.
so unique to anything we've known before or since.
I think, yes, I think you're totally right. And you bring up a point. I'm just actually really grateful that you brought this up. Sometimes we just need a little bit of a shift of perspective to see certain things that just stand out as obvious. And this behind the scenes competition between the Americans and the Soviets about access to crashed UFOs and any kind of UFO tech, that had to be big time. It's hard to know which Russian UFO crashes took place. The earliest sure bet, in my opinion, was back in the 1980s, kind of late in the day, at a place known as Dalnogorsk out in the eastern part near Kamchatka. And by the way, I talked to a witness who I believe absolutely saw the the crash site in the mountains out there. He was a member of the Soviet military. He was a young guy at the time. Good guy. I've met him here in Rochester. Uh,
Wow.
Very, like, absolutely believable guy. I'm not sure if I'm going to get him to do an interview, but totally believable. But prior to that, like, I wonder what Russian retrievals there may have been. There probably were some, but it's hard to know. There's a lot of secrecy there, but there had to be
And
competition. Yeah.
you talk about spycraft. How much of the spycraft was going over there? You talk about the false defector program in Oswald. Well, how
Yeah.
much of that was, you know, find out if that UFO really crashed? Like, you know, like there had to be intelligence associated with that. There had to be.
That's right.
And
I think you're right.
it,
I think
you
you're right.
know, and does it muddy the waters? Of course it does. And we should
Mhm.
talk about Kennedy assassination and how convoluted that is in and of itself. Now you throw in the idea, the fact that there were these things, and at that point in the late 1950s and early 1960s, what did even the government know at that point? If Eisenhower indeed had they had meetings with these ETs, even in the late 40s,
Yeah.
then they did know enough. But did they know? So did they know that when these craft were around, they weren't? They didn't have to worry about an invasion, right? So let's say they knew enough to know that. but they were also knew that their technology was so far advanced they could still do whatever the heck they wanted. Even if they had a treaty with us, they could go back on that and
Exactly.
destroy us if they wanted to.
Mhm.
Then throw the Russians into this, and then throw Kennedy into this, where he's trying to be like, okay, well, I'm dealing with the nuclear threat.
Yeah.
Right. I'm dealing with Cuba. Oh, and by the way, I'm also going to deal with the mob, Federal Reserve, the oil
Good
magnets.
Lord, man. Good grief.
So
Right.
that's what I'm saying. Like, we could, I know it's almost too much to, you could never write a book about the whole thing. You'd have to, that's why you just have to write about one specific thing.
So I want to ask you, we touched on this a little bit in the first part, but I want to come back. So Kennedy clearly was taken out by the national security deep state operatives. I mean, I don't think there's much of an argument against that. I think it's obvious. He was too much of a threat on multiple levels. So what do you think, just fast forward to now, we're in 2022, moving toward 2023, in terms of the consolidation of power of that apparatus, how complete do you think that is? What is the likelihood that any American president is actually going to be able successfully to oppose those interests? Do you have, I mean, is there any chance, or what do you think?
0%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I hate to be a bummer on your show. I really do. But
I do that often
logically.
Enough, so I'm glad someone else is doing it for a change.
Logically speaking,
Mhm.
0.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it just, and the masses are too distracted. That's what they're so good at. That's what I'm saying. We could sit here and argue about Donald Trump all day.
I was going to ask you about that, because like,
that's what they want us to do.
You and I have never, I don't think I ever really talked with you about Trump and your opinions. And I'm just going to, I'll put this out first. So I think the folks on my site realize, like, Richard's always been soft on Trump. Well, I mean, I've never been a hater. I've never hated on Donald Trump, never. And in fact, I will just say this: when he was campaigning back in 2016, this was a Republican who suddenly starts dishing out against the wars in Iraq, which he did. No Republican did that. No Democrat did that, for a matter of fact. Certainly no Republican did. And he's talking against, Trans-Pacific Partnership and a lot of the globalization stuff. And I thought, he may be an asshole or not, I don't really know, but he's actually bringing up talking points that no other American politician is talking about. And so I was actually very glad about that. Now, rhetoric is one thing, and action is another. And, he clearly can be criticized for he brings in Mike Pompeo. He brings in a lot of other really pernicious, nasty. These are people who would have fit in perfectly with the Hillary Clinton presidency, frankly. And he brings them in to his, well, I mean, Hillary Clinton is Dick Cheney. She just wears a power suit. She's exactly the same person. There's no difference.
Dick Cheney.
Well,
he's like Darth Vader. Yeah.
Well, that's Hillary. She's just
good old Dick Cheney.
So some of those folks come onto Trump's team, and you're like, oh crap, So
Here we go again.
But the fact was, Trump really was, I will maintain this. I think he was on the bad side of the intelligence community for a lot of reasons, and he was not on board with Team Global, and he was, at least in rhetoric, he was not really fully on board with a lot of the neocon stuff. I mean, he had the audacity to say, hey, maybe we should talk to the Russians. Like, what? Can't do that. He wasn't really smart on Syria, but he was better on that than Hillary. That's for sure. I mean, she was ready to start World War III on that. So he had a lot of things where he was against the neocon project quite clearly. But he, instead of killing him, they didn't assassinate him, but you saw this 24/7 full court press, other than Fox, and even parts of Fox still hated him too. They had to kind of make do with him, though, because he won over the Republican base. So it was a different kind of a situation. But I guess what I'm asking you, because we've never talked about this, and if you don't care for him, that's fine. But do you think that my analogy in the first part, where I actually explicitly compared him to Kennedy in some ways, structurally within the system, because I don't know of any other president before him. Not Obama, that's for sure. Obama was certainly on the team. George W. Bush, Hell, he was as much on the team as anyone. Clinton, total team player. Bush Senior, that's obvious. You work your way back. Then you got Reagan and you got Gerald Ford. Like all of these guys were, and then Nixon's an interesting one. We could maybe get into him if you want, but all of those presidents were like, they were completely on board. And then of course with Biden, they're completely back on board with Team Global. But Trump was different, and he was clearly hated not just by the media, but by the entire national security establishment. Am I wrong here? I mean, am I missing something, or was he just such a nasty dude that we have to look at him as somewhat different?
I think you're missing one thing, and let me start with the Kennedy comparison.
Yeah,
I think from the standpoint of ruffling feathers, you're right, because the CIA and the FBI definitely hated Trump and still do.
Right.
At different times, it's a different. There's definitely different times, but the difference is, I think Kennedy legitimately cared about the country, and sincerely cared about its people. In my opinion, I don't think Donald Trump gives a shit about anyone but himself. And I'm saying, and now I'm going back to the human nature, personality part of this.
Right.
You can say, like you said, rhetoric is one thing. I think Donald Trump would have said whatever he had to have said to get elected. Because you remember going back. See, I was born and raised in New York. I remember hearing stories about him.
Me too.
Yeah. The father was horrible. I mean, they're just not good people. I mean, the whole family.
That makes him unique among politicians. Like he's the only bad, nasty person who ever got elected to office. I'm pretty sure.
But here's the thing. But he's saying things, and he's full of shit. Like I just saw right through him because I had seen him in New York, and I not seen it, like known about him and some of the things, and I'm like, oh, this guy's he's a grifter. He's a shyster of the first order. So. When you talk about, yes, did he want to ruffle feathers, but he wanted to ruffle feathers to meet his own ends. I think with Kennedy, he really cared. I mean, Kennedy really cared about a world where there was peace and prosperity for everyone and a better country, a better world. And he was trying to fight for those things and ultimately lost that battle. But that's where the comparison would end for me with the CIA hated both of them.
Yeah, but well, okay. So for me, the personality aspect, honestly, I don't really care too much about that. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I do not expect my politicians to be these wonderful human beings. I expect them to follow through with policies that are beneficial. I remember talking with Catherine Austin Fitz, who is a good friend of mine, and also she's a brilliant lady. She was number 2 at HUD under George Bush Sr. And then turned down a position as a governor of the Federal Reserve Board because it would have been a conflict of interest with her investment company after she left the Bush White House. And she kind of made herself a kind of enemy of the state as well. Like she started doing a lot of analysis of CIA manipulation, CIA drug trafficking. She got really into that. And she's just and she does black budget economics nowadays. But she said to me in one interview that we did, I think when Trump was kind of new, it was back in 2017. She says, yeah, I think of Trump as, remember, he's a real estate guy and he thinks of America as his real estate. And in her opinion, he was all about increasing the value of that property. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That doesn't mean that he's nice, and that doesn't mean he's not a narcissist, and that doesn't mean he didn't do, asshole-ish 2 a.m. tweets all the time, and really just stupid things. Obviously, he was so easy to play if you wanted to get a rise out of him. On the other hand, he was is a master troll in his own right. All of that is, I think is what people focused on. And my late mother hated Donald Trump with every fiber in her being. I used to laugh. She'd talk to me every week. Did you hear what he said this week? And I'm like, oh, yeah, all right. Well, okay. He said another bad thing. But I don't think that's why the media actually hated him. I'll never believe that. I think the media went after him because they're part of the whole establishment. And he was a threat to the globalist project, and he was a threat to the neocon project. He ultimately caved 100% on the neocon stuff. But he didn't cave on the globalist stuff. And I think that's why they continue to hate him. And I do believe that is why they took him down. It's not because he was a narcissist. Like, who cares? I mean, honestly,
I don't know if he's been
that's a
taken
dime a
down
dozen
yet.
in Washington.
My concern is that he hasn't been taken down yet.
Well, he was taken down. I mean, you had a nonstop media assault on him while he was president. It was
Right.
nonstop.
Well,
So
listen,
they actually
you earn that, right? Like, I mean, and I get it. I get the politics of it. I totally do. And that's why I say, though, when I say to people, this Trump isn't about Democrat or Republican. He's not. And you even said it. It's more neocon, globalist versus, you know, like it's a higher level thing that we're dealing with here. You know, Trump is hardly a old school Republican.
No,
he's not
I think he was a Democrat,
conservative.
He
wasn't exactly, you know, William F. Buckley. No, you know, no. Like, yeah, no, he was he said, well, if I run, the Republicans will believe anything I say, and that's why I ran with the Republicans. But I think the one thing you're missing is how dangerous he is, and you saw that with what happened on January 6th, and I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't think there's a way out of this now, because these midterms are coming up. I've never seen such a high level of emotion associated with midterms in my life.
Oh, it's pretty big, yeah.
and why is this?
Pretty big.
And you have these people that are denying an actual legitimacy of an election because this guy says it was illegitimate. See, such a big baby.
I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I don't share your attitude 100%. In fact, I have some disagreements, but you know what? I respect where you're coming from, and I'm glad that we're discussing this, because there are, you know, this is America. America has these two sides, and I mean, a lot of it. I'm sorry that I brought up the whole Trump thing in a way, but in a way, I'm not. Because so much of the fault line in the culture wars and political wars, it really has come down to Trump. Still, he hasn't gone away. You know, my take on it is that the biggest threat that we have is not from Donald Trump. The biggest threat we have is from Davos and the World Economic Forum, and that's where I really look at, and the globalist revolution that I believe that they are foisting upon us, which is going to be a 24/7 police state, surveillance state that's never going to end, and that's what they're about. And
right,
brain computer.
What about what do you think about the oligarchs? Like the idea of oligarchy, does that fit in? Like, I just want to see how you think about that.
I'm not sure where you're going with that, but
well,
what do you mean?
Well, what I would say, okay, the influence of the billionaires in this country, like let's just, for example, the Twitter thing that just happened. Is that good? Is that bad?
Well, you got Musk buying Twitter. You have Bezos owing the Washington Post. You've got you know, Bill Gates inserting himself into the American pharmaceutical industry and dominating media. You've got who am I missing? You've got Zuckerberg controlling Facebook. And in fact, The Intercept just did a story, I should talk about this, where we see that there was direct federal government collusion with big tech to literally to censor speech, you know, in online platforms. So it's not just big tech as private companies. They were doing it explicitly with the federal government to do that. So that's a threat. With Musk, if you're asking my opinion of that, the threat that people are seeing is that he's going to allow all the right-wing crazies to have a platform again. And I don't think I have a problem with that so far. I think the biggest problem that I see is suppressing the voices that you know, that were clearly suppressed for political reasons under the old regime in Twitter. I mean, I don't see how you can argue against that when Jack Dorsey was running it with his very, very ideologically motivated team. That was quite obvious. So, I mean, they did, you know, the suppression. I'm sorry, I don't piss you off here, but the whole Hunter Biden laptop thing really was actively suppressed on Twitter and elsewhere in big tech. And it really did turn out to be it's a legit story, I think. So I think Twitter really went overboard with their censorship under the Dorsey era and after Dorsey left. So with Musk buying Twitter at a loss, I mean, he overvalued it, massively overvalued it. he said, I'm not doing it economically. I'm doing it for protection of free speech. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of things people are criticizing him now for backpedaling on this, but it's so early for me to say. We have oligarchs and billionaires owning this whole world.
Right.
And that's just the reality. And it's been that reality for a while. You mentioned the Rockefellers earlier. I mean, I don't see how it's any different. They controlled all the newspapers, all the platforms. So with Musk, I'm going to wait and see if he opens up the discussion on Twitter and allows some of the previously banned people back on. I think I would see that as a net positive. Do you have a different opinion on that?
No, I don't know. Like, I just was curious because I feel, well, no, no, I'm glad we're having this discussion because I feel like that's part, when I wrote this book, people would mention Trump and they would mention it in the same breath with, listen, look what we've had since Nixon, Ford, all these clowns, now Trump, even worse. There's truth to that because I feel like the substance of these individuals. So I do agree with that. I think that we deserve better.
Well, hey, but we got Joe Biden now. He's awesome.
Well, listen, I look at Joe Biden.
I am being very sarcastic.
I know you are. No, I know you are. And here's the thing, and I feel like this is an issue that who did I talk to about this? Oh my God. Speaking of Eisenhower, Laura Eisenhower, I was on her show, and I'm supposed to be on her show for this book, but I was on the show. John and I were on the show, and she, at the time, we were talking about the same thing we're talking about now. I see. And I was like, Laura, I just, I just can't agree with you on this. I just don't. I
haven't spoken with her about any of these. I don't know what she thinks about.
I feel like what's happened is, and I don't know, you would know best about this because you're way more in that community and you're there and you speak and you're always speaking with people within that UFO community, the research community. But I feel like that field of ufology and the people that go to the conferences and that whole idea of, okay, so if UFOs are a conspiracy, then it's almost like, well, we have to be pro QAnon.
Not necessarily. I'm not a QAnon guy, and
okay. I wanted to know that because I didn't know whether or not, like, I'm like, God, I feel like they're becoming like, it's being a little Trumpy here. Like, I just felt like almost everyone in that community.
I mean, here's what I'm going to say. I think the biggest failing, because I grew up as a lifelong liberal, man. I was lifelong.
Yeah, same.
Progressive Democrat liberal. I mean, I was Noam Chomsky, read 10 books by Chomsky or whatever. And Gore Vidal, who's still one of my heroes. I think Gore Vidal was a genius. They were all like left of center, and that was always me. But I really think that the left has completely misread Trump. And I mean, there are members of my website who will disagree with me, and I respect them. But I think that they missed it. And I think that Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. And what ended up happening is that you had people need to understand, isn't anyone curious as to why the entire American establishment, something that people on the left used to criticize all the time, especially in terms of media, like, why is it that they all just like, this never happened before in American history? They turned Trump into Hitler 2.0. And Trump may be a lot of things, but I'm sorry, man. He's not Adolf Hitler 2.0, not at all. And yet many people still believe that, I think. So how did that happen? Well, it happened with a nonstop media assault. Why is that? Well, we all know about media's collaboration with national security apparatus. And we all know this. And yet I think many of my liberal friends kind of just decided to discard that fact. It's like, what is the actual reason Trump became the enemy? And it's not because he's mean or a narcissist. I mean, my God, that's a dime a dozen in DC. Yeah, he's a trash talker. Yes. He says things that are embarrassing at times. Yes, absolutely. But I look at the policies. Like, I really wondered, like, what is it that caused? I mean, this is a guy who talking against the wars as a candidate. No one else, not even Bernie Sanders would do that. Like, criticizing the CIA as a candidate. No one on the left did that. Why not? Like, he put himself out there. Now, maybe you could say he didn't mean it, but the fact is, he said it. He said those things. And that's something far more. I mean, no one on the left since Ralph Nader had the guts to go out against globalization. Nader did it in the late 90s and made himself an enemy of the Democratic Party because he took away Oregon from Gore back in 2000. They're like, screw you. You screwed us over. And that was the end of progressive, like real anti-globalist sentiment in the Democratic Party. I think it never has returned.
No, that was a big deal. I mean, obviously it cost the election.
They were, that's right. But you had one globalist against another. You had Gore versus Bush. I mean, let's get real here. So they were really essentially going to be the same policies, in my view, very similar. And then you mentioned Skull and Bones. Bush versus Kerry in 2004. That's Skull versus Bones right there. They were both Skull and Bones. But my point is simply, after Nader left the scene, he was really the last progressive opponent of this globalist revolution. He was the last one. And after that, I don't think there's really been a peep. And then out of nowhere, Trump comes in from the right to attack it. And that was a totally unexpected thing. That was very surprising. So I think that this is what a lot of people are not really acknowledging about him. And I'm not saying he's some wonderful guy. I mean, I don't really know his psychology all that well, other than what I see publicly. But anyway, that's my take on him. So I don't see him as a savior. I see him as he came in very weak as a president, frankly. He didn't have a good team. He allowed them to take out Michael Flynn immediately as DCI, which I think had the potential to be a really good thing. Michael Flynn back in 2012 under Obama was talking about how the United States intelligence community had been supporting the Islamic State. And I was like, who is this guy? Well, he was head of the DIA, I think. And that took some guts. Took some guts. And when Trump appointed him as the new director of his intelligence community, I will just say to you and to everyone listening, that kind of blew my mind. And then to watch Flynn get taken down like instantly in a ridiculously horrible sting operation that was utterly, just wrong on every level. I thought, okay. And Trump did not defend him. Trump just let him twist in the wind there. And Flynn never got in. So, you could really see Trump. And he said this, he never expected to win. He never expected to win. I mean, never expected Hillary was just going to roll over him and escalate the war in Syria and do all the other nasty things that she was obviously going to do. But Trump got, he went in and I don't think he had a good team. I think he had a terrible team. And I don't think he knew what he was doing.
No, well, of course. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And this is where QAnon was 100% wrong. QAnon's got Trump playing 4D chess. And all this time I'm thinking, what? Like, he's not playing 4D chess. He's not. Like, he's being completely outmaneuvered by these guys. Totally.
Right.
I mean, he played 4D chess as a candidate. He was actually a really effective candidate, but he was not nearly as effective as a president.
Right.
Overall, I would say. But he was in the way of some of the globalist machinations, and that is why they had to dispose of him. This is what I think.
And I don't see. Here's the thing. I don't think most people even understand when you talk about globalists and the kinds of powers that we're dealing with. Most people don't know what that is at all. So
think of the phrase "build back better." Build back better. So in America, we think, oh, well, that's a Democratic Party thing. But no, that's a World Economic Forum thing. Trudeau was saying it. Over in Europe, Ursula von der Leyen was saying it. Like, they were all like, we have to build back better back in 2020. It was a Davos talking point. And the Democratic Party with Biden, like, they were one of because they're on the team. And so, I mean, that's what I mean by this globalist revolution that's happening. You've got, in all the collective West, you've got basically Klaus Schwab's Davos people have got their hooks in all of these governments. And Trump was not really fully on board with that, obviously. And that, I think, is why he was the enemy. It's my opinion.
Do you think they would prevent him from becoming president again? I
don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. But they would do everything possible because he's a real problem. And the thing that Trump did, I should be interviewing you. I'm sorry. Like, but I think what Trump did is he wrecked the Republican Party for
Right.
the globalist project. So he, because with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and those guys, like, what difference is that with what you have with Biden today? Like zero.
Right.
There's really no difference, especially internationally and in every other way. Like they're exactly the same administration, and you could throw in Obama, and there's really no difference. But the old Republicans, so like you got the Liz Cheneys and the Romneys and all of that. I think they're part of that club. But the problem for them is that they've been outmaneuvered by the Trump faction of the Republican Party, the MAGA people, basically. And so they're not as on board with the traditional Republican globalist policies. And so
Right.
the real question is, what's going to happen there? Like whether it's Trump or now DeSantis, people talking about him. I don't know. I mean, will they be? The fact is, I mean, I just have to say that faction of the Republican Party, that's a new faction. They're not the old Republicans. They're not the globalist centralists Republicans that you have that still dominate the Democratic Party. So the Democrats still on board with that, but a big part of the Republican Party no longer is, and that is the problem for the Republican Party establishment. I don't think they know what to do with these people. So the Davos agenda is never going to go away. It's never going away. So it really comes down to. I don't know what it's going to come down to. What's going to happen? We're going to have to see. But I don't. I guess you can tell I do not subscribe to the mainstream talking points about these people as white supremacists. Or I don't believe that. I don't think that's it at all. I think.
I think a lot of MAGA people who are. Well, I'm from the South, but I see it, and there's a certain level of ignorance. I'm not saying all, but there is a bit. If you are racist, you love Trump because even if you think he's not racist, he says things that are racist. So, but he's doing it, right. And he might be doing it just to get votes. Because he knows.
I'm not going to argue against that. Yeah, I'm not arguing against you there.
Because there are a certain amount of Republicans that are, especially in the deep South. I mean, they're highly racist. That's just the way they are. I grew up with it. I grew up with people like that, and it's partly ignorance, just in general. But to say, to me, the biggest threat, I guess, because I look at history. When we talked about history,
that's right.
I think about how horrible it must have been to be in the 1930s in Germany. And for and if you were an intellectual, I've read that Hitler, the first people that they went after were the intellectuals. It wasn't the Jews or the gypsies or the whatever. They got rid of the intellectuals first.
That's actually exactly true. There were a number of very, very influential writers under the Weimar Republic period, which just preceded that. And kind of forgetting all the names now, but yeah, I mean, a lot of them were not Jewish.
No,
some were Jewish.
Some were, but they were professors.
In Weimar, yeah, but
right.
But no, many. That's exactly true. In fact, they started with. They didn't have formal concentration camps in 1933, 34, but they were like basements that they take political dissidents down and just beat the living out of them.
Oh yeah.
And, I mean, just horrible, horrible things that they did on a regular basis. Like they started out with massive brutality and rule by terror, right from the beginning, right out of the gate. I mean, look, the Reichstag fire happens, within 2 months of Hitler becoming chancellor.
That's right.
I absolutely believe that was a false flag. They pinned it on a Dutch communist who was mentally deficient in every way, a guy named Van der Lubbe. He didn't do this. Maybe they convinced him that, oh yeah, do it. But no, this was a German intelligence operation.
Right.
Göring was involved. I think Hermann Göring.
Yeah, without question, I agree with that. But I think that's always scared me more than anything else. Fascism scares me more than communism, more than
Mhm.
And I'm always looking for elements of that. Now we have that. I mean, that's, getting back to what I was talking about this
We have
elitist,
big time elements of it in our world right now.
without question.
Right now.
And it's horrifying.
Yeah, and this, and I'm glad you acknowledging this, because this, I just don't think. I'm going to move away from Trump here, but I'm very grateful. I'm glad that we did talk about it. I don't think of that as a Trump thing. I think of this as fascism today is not going to look like fascism of a century ago. It's not going to look like fists slamming on the table and cult of the leader. I don't think that's it any longer. I think fascism looks like technocracy. It looks like nowhere to hide. It looks like a panopticon where everything is watching you. There's surveillance everywhere, and there is management through big tech of things that you're allowed to say, and the deplatforming. I think that's what fascism increasingly is going to look like. And,
Right.
It looks like our cell phones, and one day it's going to look like brain-computer interfaces, perhaps, because I think that's very likely, where these things will just invade every aspect of our consciousness, and then what? I don't see how to avoid that. That's
That's one of the downsides of
biggest fear.
technology. Yeah.
It's my greatest personal fear for our future is what this expansive technocratic surveillance state is going to do to human beings. Can I ask you a little more about Kennedy? Because this was your book, man. This is where you threw all of your effort into it, and I feel like I derailed our Kennedy conversation, and it was interesting.
No, it's all. Hey, listen, I like chatting. You know me, Richard. John and I, we always like to chat. So it's all good.
People are talking about Jack's talking about John Sumple, who is a collaborator of his in JR3 Productions, which is a documentary film company. And I know both of you guys through that. And by the way, your work on the 2 films that I participated in I just loved working with both of you. I loved working with the both of you.
Thank you. Same here, though.
Yeah,
we love working with you too.
So